Section 5 of Chapter 8. What should Christians do? If humans have intrinsic value and the basis for this is God's nature and character as revealed in the Bible, what should Christians do? Show how Imago Dei is still true in a world that rejects God. When we say that humans bear God's image, we're making a metaphysical claim. This is a claim about what kind of beings we are. Even those who don't acknowledge God still experience the reality of the beingness derived from being his image bearers. But is it possible to establish common ground with non-believers over something so theological? Philosopher William Lane Craig believes it is, based on the fact that people, regardless of their belief in God, still share moral intuition, reflection, and the ability to discern right from wrong. We can also appeal to conscience, which enables people to not only discern but also discover for themselves what is right and wrong. Pointing out that God's law is written on our hearts, Romans 2, Craig says, "My argument is that theism is necessary for there to be moral goods and duties, not that it is necessary for us to discern the moral goods and duties that there are. Regardless of their commitment to Christ, people have an internal sense of certain things we ought not to do to other human beings. It's a strong basis for dialoguing about what constitutes the value of human life." Respond logically to secularist arguments. How do we respond to people who agree that we can discern and discover the difference between right and wrong, but still believe elective abortion, destructive embryo research, and euthanasia are permissible? I've given a number of arguments throughout the chapter on each of these, but because the issue of elective abortion is front and center in the debate over the value of human life, I'd like to zero in on it specifically. When responding to the arguments of abortion advocates, remember this. Most arguments in favor of permitting elective abortion assume that unborn humans aren't valuable human beings in the sense that their right to life and dignity ought to be protected. If you keep this in mind, you'll be able to identify and respond to the most common objections to a pro-life stance. Here are a few examples. Abortion should be allowed to protect women from bad consequences. This argument is often stated in one of the following ways. Abortion isn't to be preferred, but sometimes abortion is justified to protect the finances of families. Or something like, women have the right to privacy regarding their medical decisions. Or, abortion is needed to provide women equal footing with men in their professional lives. Usually people who say we have no moral duty to protect the unborn don't come right out and advocate killing. Rather, they assume that the unborn are not human to begin with. When people use this rationale, ask, would any of these arguments be used to defend the killing of a human toddler? The answer is clearly no. So why should we assume that killing the unborn is different just because they're small, less developed, and not yet able to support themselves? And if the unborn are not persons, we shouldn't think anything more about killing them than we would about removing our wisdom teeth. If you can't trust me with a choice, how can you trust me with a child? This slogan, again, assumes the unborn aren't human. Otherwise, it's absurd. It's like asking, if you can't trust me to kill my child, how can you trust me to raise him? At one of his talks, a woman confronted Jay Watts and offered this objection. He asked if she believed that she was free to choose to walk across the room and seize any possession she chose from one of her classmates. She answered no. Jay replied, "We both agree that all women should be free to make the decisions that govern their lives. We also both agree that some choices are restricted and there are reasonable limits to how we can treat others or even use our own bodies. What we disagree on is whether or not ending the life of unborn human beings falls into the category of legitimate choice or the category of legitimately restricted choices like stealing from your classmates. The real issue is not whether women's choices ought to be respected, but whether the unborn human is the kind of being who ought to be protected." Making abortion illegal will force women into back alley abortions and lead to their deaths. This is an appeal to pity that also assumes that the unborn aren't really human beings with value. If the unborn are valuable human beings, then this argument must be seen in a new light. Should we allow the killing of more than 1.2 million valuable human beings every year to protect a much smaller number of valuable human beings from the terrible consequences of their freely chosen immoral acts? Abortion advocate Mary Ann Warren argued, the fact that restricting access to abortion has tragic side effects does not, in itself, show that the restrictions are unjustified, since murder is wrong regardless of the consequences of prohibiting it. My body, my choice. Some who favor permitting elective abortion will try to foreclose argument by saying that it isn't the business of anyone but the pregnant woman what she does with the baby she is carrying. Michael Tooley explains this view. The basic idea here is that someone who defends this liberal view on abortion may grant that abortion is in itself a prima facie wrong, and perhaps even seriously so, but then go on to claim that all acts of abortions also have a serious right-making characteristic. What might such a right-making property be? The usual answer is that it is a matter of a woman's right to determine what does and does not happen within her own body. This view is most famously represented by Judith Jarvis Thompson's violinist. Thompson argues that a woman has no duty to allow a violinist with a serious kidney ailment to be connected to her body without permission and have the use of her kidneys. Further, she isn't responsible for the violinist's death if she decides to have him separated, even if waiting 9 months would ensure that he would be cured. She may decide to keep the violinist attached out of niceness as a good Samaritan, but she isn't obligated to do so as a moral duty. In the same way, Thompson says, a woman isn't obligated to allow an unborn human being the use of her organs, even though its survival depends on her, and the unborn human in question is clearly a human being. If she decides, based on a spirit of kindness, to allow the child to use her organs, fine. If she does not allow it, she should not be held responsible for the child's neediness. Francis Beckwith and Christopher Cazor have both responded to Thompson's original article, as well as David Boonan's modified defense of it. Their criticisms include the following observations of the violinist argument. It ignores the procreative nature of the sex act in denying the woman has any responsibility in the neediness of the child. It denies that pregnancy is a natural good and describes it in terms of a pathology or the child as an intruder. It denies the natural special responsibilities that one has to our offspring. It introduces a form of moral volunteerism without arguing for it, saying that women are responsible for only those duties they agree to accept. It confuses unplugging, where the violinist dies from his illness, with actively killing, where the fetus dies from being dismembered, chemically poisoned, and burned, or sucked out of the mother's womb in pieces by a vacuum. So what about rape? Some will say that there ought to be exceptions for rape because a woman is being forced against her will to bear a child she doesn't want. While only 1% of aborting women report that their pregnancy was due to rape, the question of abortion in cases of rape is a deeply emotional issue that hits right at the heart of how we protect the powerless and vulnerable. And yet, if we consider the inherent value of the unborn human, the issue becomes more complex, not less. There are 3 people involved in the rape: the rapist, the woman, and the child. In most places in the world, convicted rapists are sent to prison but not killed. And no one would suggest the woman ought to be killed for the rapist's crime. So why is it assumed that the only person who should be punished with death for the crime is the unborn child? Is that just? Abortion advocates point out that the trauma of bearing a rapist child is simply too great a burden for a woman to bear. It is an unimaginably painful situation fraught with heartache, but as Amherst College political science professor Hadley Arks asks, do you think she would have trauma in confronting the rapist again in a trial? Would you just order up the killing of the rapist rather than have her go through with that? Without question, the gestation and birth of a human person is a ponderous issue. Having a baby changes a woman's life forever. The consequences flowing from the decision to have sexual intercourse can be life-altering, but what does it say about a nation that refuses to grapple with it in any way except by allowing medical procedures that end a life? This goes beyond the way we view unborn children. It affects the way we as civilized people view the value of life. The abortion question is both personal and about the conscience of a whole nation. Fight for the conscience of the nation. In his famous 1852 speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, ex-slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass insisted the slavery controversy was largely settled on the ideal level. The slave was human, and everyone knew it. What people lacked was a properly formed conscience. It is not light that it is needed, but fire, said Douglass. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. The battle of ideas is ultimately a battle of conscience. How might the conscience of the nation be awakened on the issue of life? First, people need to see the injustice of an anti-life stance in a way that changes how they feel about abortion and euthanasia. Second, people must be presented with facts and arguments to change how they think. Both are vital if people's behavior is to change. Pictures are key. Daily, we're confronted with pictures dramatizing child labor, starvation, war injustices, racial violence, and cruelty to animals. Pictures work in confronting people with the injustice of abortion, too. During the 1990s, graphic illustrations of partial birth abortion swayed public opinion toward the pro-life view, especially on late-term abortion. If you show pictures of aborted babies, you can expect people who favor abortion to be outraged. Why? Because pictures seriously damage the pro-abortion argument. One of the dirty secrets of abortion is it's really gruesome, admitted Cynthia Gorney, an abortion advocate. With partial birth, the right to life movement succeeded for the first time in forcing the country to really look at one awful abortion procedure. Feminist Naomi Wolf writes, when someone holds up a model of a 6-month-old fetus and a pair of surgical scissors, we say choice and we lose. When abortion advocates like Gorney and Wolf concede such a critical point, perhaps we should listen. We must also make a good case. The flawed arguments we considered in the previous section attempt to justify not just the personal decisions of individual women, but global policies that favor abortion. According to some estimates, there have been more than 1 billion abortions worldwide in the last half century. If people gain value based on their performance or their utility to the group, then there simply is nothing wrong with abortion, even if the reasons for having it are trivial. If a woman aborts because she doesn't like morning sickness or doesn't want a baby bump during her upcoming vacation, who are we to say that's bad? And if abortion is okay because the child is likely to be mentally handicapped or unattractive, who's to say it's wrong to abort a girl when you wanted a boy? On the other hand, if the unborn are human in the same way that you and I are, then the justifications given to support abortion rights are utterly insufficient. We don't kill other human beings as a means of addressing poverty and anxiety over the future, or even to eliminate reminders of profoundly painful past events. If unborn humans have inherent value, the appeal to the privacy or freedom of those around them can never excuse killing them any more than abusive husbands' freedoms should prevent authorities from intervening when he is beating his wife, even in the privacy of their home. If the unborn are human in the same way that you and I are, then the destruction of unborn human beings we're seeing in our time is unlike anything that has happened in human history. Entire nations of people quietly and efficiently wiped from the earth. Each day that passes with our silence deadens our consciences, making it harder to discern the value of any human life. Learn to respond to fallacious attacks. As pro-life activists become more articulate at pointing out the inherent value of unborn humans, the elderly, and others whose existence is seen as inconvenient, their opponents often turn to fallacious attacks. Here's a couple of examples. You're biased. When confronting a man who opposes elective abortion, many abortion advocates decry, but you're a man. In what other areas of life would we accept this sort of reasoning? It's like saying that only people who support the right to slavery should have a voice in deciding whether it should be abolished. It's complicated. As a last resort, those who support elective abortion often claim that abortion and euthanasia are complicated issues that families considering them should be left alone. Again, this kind of thinking assumes that a complicated decision justifies killing. Ask, would you be in favor of leaving a woman alone who wants to kill her 3-year-old child because he is complicating her life? The fact that issues are complicated doesn't justify taking a life. Personally care. It's one thing to make intellectual arguments and another to come alongside to help people who are in difficult situations. Fortunately, movements promoting the value of human life have gone far beyond marching and waving signs. Today, women who find themselves with an unplanned pregnancy can find support at one of hundreds of pregnancy care centers that help with adoption connections, teaching parent skills, and acquire food, clothing, and supplies. At the same time, activists like Lila Rose, whose organization Live Action sponsored the undercover investigators we met at the beginning of this chapter, have raised the alarm about the abortion business's seamy underside. Americans United for Life, or the AUL, has developed model legislation and seen it passed in state legislatures across the country. One AUL-designed bill, the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002, which requires legal protection for infants surviving abortion, has been passed in 30 states. Others have devised creative new methods for raising awareness. Students for Life of America has started student chapters on university campuses across the country that make the pro-life case to college students. Justice for All and Ratio Christi have done so as well. Scott Klusendorf and his team at Life Training Institute send speakers into Catholic and Protestant high schools nationwide and in Canada. I highlighted another example, Joe Baker, in one of my blog posts. He founded Save the Storks, a pro-life organization aiming to convince mothers considering abortion to save their babies. Knowing that abortion-minded women are often persuaded to keep their babies after viewing an ultrasound, and also recognizing that many are unwilling to go to the trouble of canceling their clinic appointment and scheduling an ultrasound at a cross-town location, Save the Stork solution was to outfit a bus with the latest ultrasound equipment, hire a nurse, and park outside an abortion clinic. In 2011, after one stork bus had toured the country, Save the Storks then contracted with the Downtown Pregnancy Center in Dallas, Texas, which will permanently operate the bus around local abortion clinics. The success of the project inspired pregnancy centers around the country to order buses as well. Baker's goal is to have a bus in every major U.S. city. My wife and I are capable of building something that could make a lot of money, he told me. Our desire, though, is really just to build the things we want to, like Save the Storks. Along with Lila Rose and organizations such as Americans United for Life and Students for Life, Baker is helping not only to save babies, but to restore a culture of life, persuading people at the level of both their minds and their hearts. Section 6. Human life is special. As Christians, we understand that we're made in the image of God. We have inestimable value simply because we're human. We are to love and honor God as well as our fellow image bearers. Though many in our world reject grounding our value in God, they do recognize that there is a moral law and that humans have moral duties. These shared intuitions provide common ground on which we can dialogue about scientific and philosophical arguments supporting the intrinsic value of human beings. Today, we live in a culture of death. Abortion, embryo-destructive technologies, and euthanasia represent a dereliction of our duties to be the least of these. Of our duties to the least of these. Scripture makes our responsibility clear. Be on the lookout for and take care of the most helpless in our communities. Sophisticated or tricky arguments to the contrary, human life is inherently valuable. Christopher Kazor concludes, do we really have reason to believe that for the very first time in human history we are justified in treating some human beings as less than fully persons? Or will we be judged by history as just one more episode in the long line of exploitation of the powerful over the weak? The end.